Support for this NPR podcast and the following message come from Fox Home Entertainment's The Post, the untold true story of the Pentagon Papers cover-up and the journalists who worked to expose the truth. Starring Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. Available on Blu-ray or to rent.
Hey, y'all. This is Sam's Aunt Betty. This week on the show, NPR producer Justin Richmond and NPR reporter and Code Switch host Shireen Marisol Meraji. All right, let's start the show.
Y'all know what I'm playing right now.
Oh.
This is one of the best Kanye song opens maybe of all time.
It's brilliant.
Hey, y'all, from NPR, I'm Sam Sanders. It's been a minute. Each week, the show starts with a different song. We'll talk about this one very soon. But first, I got to thank my two guests for being here with me today in studio. Shireen Marisol Meraji, she covers race, ethnicity, and culture for NPR. Also hosts NPR's Code Switch podcast. And Justin Richmond, producer extraordinaire for a show you may have heard of called Morning Edition at NPR.
That's right.
Thank you both for being here, and thank you, Kanye, for this lovely, rousing anthem to get us into this show. The beat knocks.
Oh, it's
it
good.
does.
I'ma need to see up to your pants at the concert. Profit. I get it. Everybody know I'm a monster.
So this song is called Monster. It's from Kanye's classic album, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And I'm playing Kanye this week for a reason. Not just because it's always a good time to play Kanye. Have you guys been following his tweets this week?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I've been inspired.
Right? So usually, so for the last long time, Kanye's been pretty silent on social media. But this week, he came all up back in Twitter, and he's been posting some very inspirational tweets. Like
True.
these.
Yes.
Quote, "Distraction is the enemy of vision." Another one, "Everything you do in life stems from either fear or love." My favorite from the week, quote, "Be transparent as possible. Stop setting plays. Stop playing chess with life. Make decisions based on love, not fear." Life coach Kanye.
Yeah.
Thank you. I like this,
salute you,
Kanye.
Right?
I didn't even know I was playing chess with life. I wish
Well,
I
you
had known
are.
that.
Checkmate. So Kanye also at the end of this week tweeted out that he's going to put out a new album on June 1st. But with his last release, he pushed it back a lot. So I wouldn't trust it totally, but maybe we'll see an album before the year's out. One of my favorite songs of his, and I want to say possibly the best Nicki verse.
Oh, yeah. Definitely the best Nicki verse.
All right, you guys, Shireen and Justin are here with me today to look back at the week of news, culture, and everything else. Let's get into it. We're each going to describe how this week of news felt for us in 3 words.
Okay.
Justin, do you have 3 words? If so, go.
I have 3 words.
What
go.
are they?
We've been waiting.
That's actually 4 because it's a contraction. It's fine.
But it's come on, man.
I'm going to let it slide. Go
Cheating.
ahead.
Cheating.
I mean, maybe I should just say I've been waiting. I don't want to throw
That's still a
everyone into the-
contraction.
Okay, I'm sorry. I've been waiting.
I've been waiting.
I've
Okay,
been
go
waiting.
ahead.
First of all, I've been waiting since Comey testified in front of Congress for his book to come out.
You, really? You have?
Yeah, because
Did
I
you
was like, as soon
pre-order
as
it like everybody else?
No, I mean, I didn't pre-order. No, I'm not.
I'll tell you once you're done, but I have not been waiting for this book, and I'll tell you why. But you
Please,
go ahead.
please.
Why have you been waiting for the book?
When he was testifying, I mean, it was clear. It was like, man, this dude's going to write a hell of a book. And so, I mean, at first I was a little salty because I felt like this feels a bit tacky. Maybe you should have waited a couple of years.
Yeah.
A few years, 5 years. But then as I was listening to the Fresh Air interview and a couple others, and he's saying that he's basically comparing our president to a mafia boss. It's like, that's stunning.
That's drama.
You can't.
That's drama.
That's stunning,
Can
man.
I tell you my beef with Comey, though?
Let me hear it.
I've seen him way too much this week. He
Yeah.
has been everywhere.
Yes.
The Times, MSNBC, NPR like 5 times. The View. I mean,
And he's back.
Yeah.
Because the memos came out.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was posing with
15
Method
pages of
Man and
memos.
Ghostface Killer backstage at Kobe.
Was he
Yes,
really?
Everywhere.
So this is my question. Does Jim Comey want to sell a book or does he want to have a legacy?
Yeah.
And he's in this really interesting position. He has no constituency. Liberals still think he lost Hillary the election. Conservatives still think he's out to get Trump. Like, what does he get after this besides a best-selling book?
He just wants to control his own narrative, I think.
Yeah.
That's what he wants to do.
Yeah.
He wants to say, this is my story, and this is the way I want to tell it, because y'all are telling my story for me, so at least I'm going to be on the record.
And it's just hard to know who's being petty here because of all of this. Who's being petty?
They're all petty.
You know, it's like-
I did learn on that Terry Gross interview that he likes to say Lordy.
but we knew that from when he testified, when he said,
Oh, yeah, Lordy.
Lordy.
I hope there are tapes.
Lordy.
All righty.
All right, my turn. My 3 words are who's in charge. And I say that this week because there have been a few storylines coming out of the Trump White House that have me asking the question, who's in charge? First one, have you guys been following this stuff with Nikki Haley and the Russia sanctions, possible Russia sanctions? Yeah. So Nikki Haley is Trump's ambassador to the UN. And after U.S. and allied strikes in Syria, she announced that the U.S. was going to institute some more sanctions on Russia for their involvement in Syria. She said it was going to happen on a Sunday morning talk show. And then another member of the administration came out after that, Larry Kudlow, Trump's economic advisor, and said, she's confused. Then Nikki came back and said, hold up. Quote, I don't get confused. Literally sparring between 2 members of the same administration. Made me say who's in charge. Second instance where I said who's in charge was this news that Mike Pompeo, who is now director of the CIA, might soon be Secretary of State. He made a secret visit to North Korea months ago to possibly negotiate a lot of things. The meeting went very smoothly, he said, but we just found out about it this week.
If you had told me Dennis Rodman, I would have believed it.
Hey-o.
So the third thing that had me saying who is in charge was this report in the New York Times, which the White House denies. The report basically said that Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis actually wanted the White House to get approval from Congress before those strikes happened. And the White House and Trump said, no, I want to do it myself and do it big. The White House denies this. But after the Syria strike and all of that back and forth, we also found out that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, he said that he was the one that convinced Trump to actually care about Syria. Who is in charge?
We need a Charles.
In charge of our days
we
and our
do.
nights.
Someone's got to be in charge.
Of our wrongs and our rights.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right.
With that, Shereen, what are your 3 words?
My 3 words are tall, black, cafecito.
Tall, black, cafecito.
Yes.
I think this is the first time we've had a word that is not English in 3 words.
Oh, well.
I like it. Explain it, though.
Okay. So it's a Starbucks order. Because Starbucks has been in the news all week.
Yeah.
Because of the incident that happened in Philly at a Starbucks where 2 African-American men were arrested for sitting there without ordering something.
Yes.
And Starbucks CEO, Kevin Johnson, his name is Kevin Johnson, not the Kevin Johnson that used to play for the Sacramento Kings.
Mayor of Sacramento.
Yeah.
But the CEO came out, he apologized, and he said, hey, we're going to do racial bias training.
A whole day
for
where
our
all
employees.
the stores close.
That's right. 8,000 stores are going to close. I'm not sure if it's a whole day or a half day.
Okay.
I couldn't get
Okay.
that straight. But yes, they're going to close for some time, for some hours to do racial bias training.
Yeah.
So tall black cafecito, or should it be tall Baylac cafecito?
Why Baylac?
Because Baychella, I have my little
Are you going to whistle?
whistle here.
Shereen got a yellow
Where's my
whistle up in
drum
here.
line?
Come on.
Okay, so what Shereen is talking about is Beyonce's set at Coachella, which featured a historically black college and university black
Theme.
marching band theme.
Yes.
So it starts with this single woman snare drummer and a whistle.
Oh, amazing. I have the chills. Look at me. Look at me. I have the chills.
So her Coachella set, 1, she was the first black woman to headline Coachella.
Exactly.
And 2, she played for 2 hours.
Yes, and she did not let the crowd forget that she was the first black woman
Yeah.
to headline Coachella. She was like, by the way, just in case you didn't know.
Yeah.
And, and Coachella's been around for 19 years, so that's a long
It's a long
time.
time.
Long time.
So Gaga was the first, I think, woman to headline last year.
Oh.
And now Beyonce.
Beyonce
did
should
it
have been. Beyonce was supposed to play last year.
and then
Oh,
she got
well,
pregnant.
yeah.
Again, we've been waiting.
We've been waiting. But, I must say, like, I've seen Beyonce live, and I was like, this is the best show of my life. But every year or so, she upstages herself. Y'all all saw it, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, of course. Oh my
My
gosh,
wife made me watch it. Are you kidding me? I couldn't.
I've been trying to get the choreography to the beginning
so.
of Crazy in Love. Okay, but you have to have like squat power.
Okay, do it.
Oh wait, no. Okay, they're making me dance in here. This is radio.
The listeners could hear that.
But actually, getting back to the news, she did. And speaking of HBCUs, she did announce that she was going to have a $100,000 scholarship fund, which was so $25,000. That was earlier this week. $25,000 is going to go to 4 different HBCUs to give to a student for scholarships. So
Look at that.
great,
she's
man.
about it.
Oh, she is about it.
I gotta say,
Oh wait,
too,
I'm not
man.
done, by the way.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, just real quick, because tall black cafecito.
I love hearing you
There's
keep
just
saying
so
that.
many
That's
things.
amazing.
Cafecito, because, you know, when you're ordering a Cuban coffee, you say, un cafecito, por favor. And
There's some Cuban news this week.
so there's some Cuban news, and I won't step on that because I know that's the main story for the show, but Cuba's got a new leader
That's not going to be a Castro.
that's not going to be a Castro.
for the first time in a long time.
And I'm going to say all his names. Don't get
Say it.
mad.
Please do it.
All
Let's hear it.
his names. Miguel Mario Diaz Canel Bermudez.
Wow, perfect.
Oh, my goodness.
So
On
I
that
dare
note,
you.
Yeah,
I dare
I
you.
can't do that. We are going to talk more about Cuba a bit later. Right now, we're going to go to a little break. Coming up, we're going to call up a former police officer and get his perspective on that Starbucks arrest incident. Also, we're going to debrief all about Cuba's power transition this week. And, of course, we'll play my favorite game, Who Said That? You are listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Sam Sanders, and we'll be right back.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Gelmar CLR. Whatever you call your home, Gelmar knows you take great pride in keeping it clean. That's where CLR comes in. CLR dissolves calcium, lime, and rust all around the house using natural ingredients, not harsh chemicals. It even carries the EPA's Safer Choice seal. Keep your little piece of the planet looking its best with CLR, making the world a little cleaner.
This is Terry Gross, the host of Fresh Air. We do long-form interviews with the people behind the best books, pop culture, journalism, and more, so you can get to know the people whose work you love. You'll find Fresh Air on NPR One or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, the show where we catch up on the week that was. I'm Sam Sanders here with 2 great guests today. Shireen Marisol Meraji, she covers race, ethnicity, and culture for NPR and also hosts NPR's Code Switch podcast. And Justin Richmond, producer on NPR's Morning Edition. You guys, before we get back into the news, I got a quick question for you. It involves a rather strange story I saw this week. An 8th grade teacher teaching social studies, he got in trouble in Pennsylvania recently. Last week, his students were taking their statewide standardized tests, and he wanted to be nice, and he made them pancakes. Supervisors found out.
So good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They said they were going to fire him
For making
because it was
his kids-
against policy.
You can't make your kids food.
You can't make your kids food. So the students protest, the parents
this is
protest.
breaking my
They
heart.
reinstate the guy. This teacher's
Yeah.
name is Kyle Byler. He's back. But it got me to thinking, what would you want to eat before a standardized test or a live radio hit or something stressful?
I mean, I think protein, something with protein. I actually think pancakes are a bad idea because
Yeah,
they
you just want to
have
fail his
Rain on my
students.
parade.
they have a lot of gluten. They make you tired, you know. So I would like some eggs, probably just egg whites.
Yeah, that's why I'm about to roll egg
Look at
whites
this
in
California.
egg whites and some avocado.
Okay.
And a
He's
matcha
from
latte
California,
with some
too.
water.
Y'all know what I want?
What do you want?
Shot of whiskey.
Oh, yeah,
Lord,
for sure.
Lord.
Where's our whiskey right now? by
I
the
know,
way?
right?
I'm saying.
Anyway, now it's time for a segment that we call Long Distance, where we call a listener and talk to them about the news. Seems like every week there is another story in the news about how police officers relate to people of color. Earlier, we discussed in the show the story you mentioned, Shireen, about that Starbucks in Philadelphia where 2 black men were arrested while just waiting there in the coffee shop for a business meeting. And a few weeks ago on this show, we had a big discussion about shootings involving police. That was after the shooting death of Stephon Clark in Sacramento. So we had Wesley Lowery on from the Washington Post, and he said a thing that really stuck with one listener. Wesley said that, legally speaking, all an officer has to do is really just say that they felt their life was in danger, and they are allowed, basically, to kill someone.
And my first reaction was, wait a minute, that's not right. And then I realized, well, that could be right.
That is Dave Hill. He was a listener. He lives in Orange County, California, just down the highway from us here in Los Angeles. Dave was a police officer in Southern California for 30 years. He retired as a lieutenant, and he got in touch with us after he heard that episode, said he wanted to talk. So we did talk about the Starbucks incident and so many stories, not just of arrests, but of police-involved shootings.
The law does say if an officer is in fear for their life, then deadly force is an allowable option. But I also know I received some specific training in how to articulate why you were afraid. And I remember vividly the trainer was reading from a police report in which the officer was describing all the details, the weather, the lighting, the actions of the suspect, what they were saying, how they were acting, their body language, to paint a picture so the most obtuse member of any jury could listen to that report and say as much as they could, they experienced that with the officer and come away with an understanding of why the officer was afraid or in fear for their life.
Yeah. Do you think that imperative on officers to, quote unquote, paint a picture, does that ever, in some cases, perhaps give some officers license to exaggerate?
That's a good question. I think since we recruit from the human race, there might be that tendency. I can't speak to that
For sure.
In anything I've observed.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a particular news event this week that I'm wondering if you have thoughts on as well. I'm talking about that story from that Starbucks in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
I see this as a civilian, as a black man, and I'm just befuddled by it.
Right.
Is there a way in which you see that scenario in which it made sense?
Not necessarily. And I can only speak from a position of experience with California law.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like there was any kind of dynamic situation that needed immediate action and immediate decision making.
Yeah.
This was something where we could have, slow down, talk to these people, find out what's going on, share what the options are. If a shopkeeper absolutely wants to press charges, talk to them about the consequences. Are they willing to go to court? Do you realize this is a nonviolent situation? In the best interest of the people we go to church with, the people we, run into at the store, how can we live this situation in the future or similar situations? Well, we need to have the conversation, and that conversation might be to close your Starbucks for, your company for a day, and talk about and be honest and be vulnerable about what's in your heart and how you can best live your best self, if you will.
Yeah. If you were to be in charge of creating an anti-bias training for police officers, as a former police officer who's been out there doing the work for, 30 years, what would be the number one thing that you would include in a police anti-bias training?
I go back to when the department for which I worked started to become more diverse. I realized that I was growing. My heart was growing in different ways. My mind was growing in different ways from interacting with people of different color, maybe officers who came from backgrounds of traditionally marginalized communities. And that was very eye-opening. But I'll tell you what happened to me was after I left law enforcement and went into private business, and I worked with people from all different backgrounds. And no longer was I an officer; I was one of the folks. And being exposed to mostly younger people, but some of my age and therearound, who came from different backgrounds, different communities, different color, different sexual orientation, different lifestyles, whatever you want to call it. They were just different, and it was great to interact with them because it humanized them, and it helped me to develop relationships as opposed to categorizing relationships over categories, I guess is the best way I could say that.
Yeah. Do you think, as someone who was in it for 30 years and watching it now, do you think the relationship between police officers and particular marginalized groups of people in America, is it getting better?
In my corner of the world here in Southern California, I believe they are. Okay. But I'll tell you this also. I just read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And I was particularly struck by his words about the white moderate, and that hit a little too close to home, and how instead of rising up with King's nonviolence movement, the white moderate of that era said, you're being too controversial. You should wait. Rights will come. Give it time. And it just kind of feels like, in a lot of ways, we're still there. So I wish I had a really good answer, and I think it comes down to, if the thin blue line still exists, we need it to be between all of the good people and those that would do the good people harm. And all of those good people need to include officers, civilians, all races, all colors, all creeds, all religions, all backgrounds, marginalized or not. And that only comes from having conversations and interacting and getting to know people, so that it's not your black neighbor or your Muslim neighbor. It's your neighbor.
Yeah, I love that. What are you going to do for fun this weekend?
I am building a little block wall. My wife and I are teaming up to build a block wall out in front of our house. And not only makes the house look nice, but it also provides for a little bit of exercise.
Okay.
If you can consider that fun, that's what I'm going to be doing.
That actually sounds pretty fun.
You're welcome to come over and help if you like. We're only in Yorba Linda. It's just a quick shot down the 10, so...
I'll be there, but I'm quite clumsy and not that handy. I want to say, Juan, thank you so much for writing in to the show and for listening. Thank you for being so thoughtful on these really tough issues. And I don't think this comes through enough in coverage of these police issues, because when these stories pop up, we're talking about the few bad apples, not the majority of good ones. But as a civilian, I am grateful to police all over the country who every day are working to protect people like me. And I want to make that clear. So thank you for your service.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And Sam, I'm glad we had this conversation.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to Dave Hill, the retired police officer out of Orange County, California, for that call. The thing that I always realize when you break these events down, it's like people individually can make the right decision. But something about some of these events and conflagration of certain factors, it leads to like something that's explosive.
What struck me about what he said in your interview with him was that it wasn't really until the police department diversified that he started meeting with different officers and people from quote-unquote marginalized communities that that he was able to humanize them. Mm-hmm. And that really struck me, that...
Yeah.
You know? And so Jamel Bowie actually wrote for Slate on this about white spaces and how this particular Starbucks was in a
very
part of
white
Philly
neighborhood
that was 79% white and only 6% black.
Yeah.
And that we need to talk about white spaces and what happens when you're a person of color and you're in a white space.
Yeah. And I think that, like, you know, his perspective, being in Southern California, like our perspective, it's just more of a mashup.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, I am privileged to live in a part of town and live in a place and work in a place that is really diverse. But I think we forget that most of America is pretty segregated still.
But also the fact that, like, why aren't we thinking about people as humans, period?
You should be able to empathize with people that you haven't met.
It's easier said than done, though, right?
True.
I mean, I think some of this stuff is just, like, tribal and almost biological, this kind of in-group, out-group urge.
Yeah, and maybe I'm influenced by growing up here, like you said, where there is a whole bunch. I mean, so it's I mean, maybe easier for me to say than you know, had I grown up elsewhere, or, you know, had I been a white guy growing up somewhere.
Listeners, want to talk to you about how you process the news. If you have a reaction to something you've heard on this show or any story you've seen in the headlines on any week, let us know. Drop me a line at samsanders@npr.org, samsanders@npr.org. You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, the show where we catch up on the week that was. I'm Sam Sanders here with two guests today, Shireen Marisol Meraji, host of NPR's Code Switch podcast, and Justin Richmond, drinker of matcha lattes, and also a producer on NPR's Morning Edition.
I'm fancy. I'm fancy. Matcha latte and Morning Edition.
I'm sorry.
All right, you guys, it's time for our main story. We want to talk about Cuba today because there's something really big there happened this week, big symbolically at least.
Yeah.
Raul Castro, brother of Fidel, he stepped down as president this week, and he handed off power to someone outside of the Castro family. That new leader's name is...
Miguel Mario Díaz-Canel Bermúdez.
Yes. Yes. So I want us to talk about a few things. Who this guy is and what it means. And I want to point out to our listeners that this is important. I think that we don't see Cuba in the headlines a lot, but it's important because Cuban Americans have been a force in Florida politics for decades. Cuba could be a part of diplomatic relations all through Latin America, especially with Venezuela. And Cuba is a nation that America's opponents, like China and Russia, want to get a bigger foothold in. So, you guys, before we talk about Cuba, I think we have to acknowledge that maybe a lot of Americans, a lot of listeners, don't think about it that much. How would we describe the last 20 years for Cuba and its relationship with the U.S., I guess, for those folks?
Well, it's gone back and forth.
Okay.
I mean, 20 years ago, we were still, maintaining the hard line against Cuba that we had for the 30-plus years previous, keeping the embargo against them. And, of course, with President Obama came the détente, and that opened things up a bit more. We opened up our embassy, and people were able to travel there freely. Our president actually went down there, which is the first time in a long time that had happened, since the revolution, that had happened. And then, of course, now that President Trump has come back in, he's crafted a Cuba policy with hardliners in Congress to basically repeal parts of the Obama détente, and now we have a pretty limited embassy there, and it seems like we just are not thinking about it.
Justin, you've been covering this story for your show, Morning Edition.
Morning Edition, yeah.
What have you found out about Miguel Diaz-Canel Bermudez?
So the most interesting thing about him is that there's not a ton known about him. And I even spoke to various government officials who've met him.
Really?
Yeah. And, he's from a city called Santa Clara, about 3 hours outside of Havana.
I've been there.
He is an engineer by training, got a college degree in engineering, did his obligatory 3 years in the military, then joined the Young Communist League, where that's really where he started taking off in terms of politics. He kind of rose the ranks there pretty quickly and became the Minister of Education in Cuba, all of Cuba. Became the vice president in 2013 and kind of has towed the party line and has been able to take over now because he's done that.
But Raul Castro will still lead the Communist Party in Cuba.
Yes, until his term for that is up in 3 more years, and then he'll step down from that too.
Because Raul Castro instituted term limits a few years ago.
Yeah.
So eventually Diaz-Canel will head the party and the presidency.
And the presidency, exactly.
Gotcha.
Just like Raul and Fidel had done before.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, in his speech when he assumed the presidency, he said in his speech, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing. And he kind of paid reverence to the Castros and in a way almost said that, like, they're still in charge.
Yeah, well, because and this is what's interesting. In one way, he's positioned himself as different because there's a lot of people will note he's a fan of the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, and
he's
he
younger.
uses technology, and he's younger, and
And
he's
his
born
kids
after the
were in a rock
revolution,
band.
and his kids were in a rock band, which was illegal in Cuba for a long time. They didn't like rock and roll. But in many ways, when I was talking to Ben Rhodes, who was an Obama advisor and kind of helped, was basically like instrumental in the détente that happened under Obama, what he was saying was that the main challenge for Miguel Diaz-Canel is going to be to craft a narrative for the Cuban people. For 59 years, it's been the revolution.
Castro,
They've been able to sell the revolution. Castro and Raul, as members of the revolution, people partook in it. He was born a year after the revolution. And so he needs to create a narrative, and it might be easiest for him now to keep selling the Castro legacy to people because things aren't great there. So people need a reason to believe, and it might be easiest for him, at least at the time being, to just keep hanging on to the Castro legacy and selling that.
Yeah. So this power transition happens about a year after Donald Trump rolled back a lot of what Barack Obama did to try to better the relationship between Cuba and the U.S. He resumed diplomatic relationship between the two countries. He eased some travel and trade restrictions. Trump came in and said, no, I want to take it all back. In reality, that's the thing. His bark was bigger than his bite, right?
Yeah. And, a lot of those changes were small changes, but have had a huge impact on things like tourism there. I mean, you can still go to Cuba as an American, but
you can't plan your own private trip.
You can't
plan
your own private trip. You got to go with the group. And even that, I still know people who are, I won't call them out, but who are still going. I mean, there's ways around that even.
No, they're always happening.
But there's this bluster possibly from Cuba, for sure, from Trump. But some of those Obama-era changes, they've stayed. The embassies are still open.
Limited staff,
of course, yeah. But Cubans can still travel freely, Cuban Americans, between the island and the U.S. They can still send money back. And the business community, after Trump announced his rollback, they kind of pushed back and said, don't close off business. Don't close us off.
Yeah, there's money to be made.
There you go.
They're still negotiating that stuff. Yeah, business deals.
I want to talk a little bit about what a positive or better relationship with Cuba could do for the U.S. We've known for some time that there has not been a really positive relationship. But I talked to a few folks this week who said if we did have a better relationship with Cuba, we could get something out of it. There are a few things. One, if the U.S. really wanted to fight drug trafficking in the Caribbean at the port of Miami, which is a big point of entry for a lot of illegal drugs, Cuba should probably be at the table, right?
Yeah, and they were at the table for the Colombia-FARC negotiations.
That's the thing.
They helped with that.
This is the second thing. Cuba is a player in Latin American geopolitics. As Justin said, they helped negotiate the end to the civil war in Colombia. The thinking is that they could help negotiate with Venezuela, if we were friendly, right? Yeah. And then the third thing, which I mentioned earlier, Cuba could be a point of entry for Western influence for Russia and China.
Yeah, and Russia and China they're warming back up to Cuba. For a long time, there hadn't been. I mean, China and Cuba's relationship has always been a little fraught, but they're going in there now and agreeing to invest in infrastructure. Russia's doing the same thing again, which hasn't been since the early 90s that they've done that. So you see the influence slowly creeping in there.
Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, exactly.
And meanwhile, Russia docked one of its intelligence ships in Havana a few months ago.
Yep, and they're considering reopening a spy base, their old spy base there.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I am really interested in Trump's posture towards Cuba and what that says about the state of American politics and how much Cuba actually matters to American politics. I would say right now Cuba doesn't matter too much. No?
Well, I think that if Trump's stance towards immigration is upsetting Cuban voters enough that they won't go to the polls and vote for Republicans, I think that matters. I mean, that's not necessarily about what happens with Cuba, but I do feel like Cuban voters have been strong Republicans since the beginning, and President Trump's immigration policies have upset all Latinos, including some Cubans who have been rethinking whether they should vote for Republicans or not. So I think in that way, Cubans maybe are important, and what Trump says about immigration is important.
Yeah. And it seems as if a lot of Trump's rhetoric on Cuba and this rollback of the opening from him, it is meant to appeal to this conservative Cuban-American base in South Florida, but it's also meant to appeal specifically to Florida Senator Marco Rubio.
I really think that's mostly what it's for because, new generations of Cuban Americans seem to be less interested in maintaining the hard line against Cuba that we have for nearly the last 60 years with some interruptions. But a lot of our Cuban Americans in the House and in the Senate still maintain that hard line. And, it was just easy for Trump to defer to them to figure out his Cuba policy.
And when you think about Cubans, Shireen, of course, we have to be fair. Cuban Americans and Cubans themselves, they're not a monolith politically at all. The later you came to America from Cuba, it affects your thoughts on these issues. And you were saying to me earlier this week that your race as a Cuban could affect it too, no?
Talking about Cubans and race is really complicated, as we say all the time on Code Switch.
Yeah.
So early on in Cuba's history, this is before the revolution, there was really this push to whiten up Cuba. And it's Blancamiento is what it was called. And then after the revolution, this diaspora of Cubans that came to the United States, they really considered themselves white. And they were also from, upper middle class, high economic backgrounds. And these are the Cubans that really originally settled and voted Republican and have been the dominant Cubans in the United States. The diaspora since is much browner and it is much poorer. And I think that the way that Cuban people are treated in the United States is different. And I think that
than white Cubans.
Yes. And I think that that's going to affect how the different waves vote and how they are voting.
Yeah.
And so when you say that Cuba's not a monolith or Cubans are not a monolith in the United States, no, they're not.
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing a browning of
Cuban America.
Of Cuban Americans.
Well, and then I think we're also seeing perhaps Donald Trump is overestimating the strength of Cuban Americans as a voting bloc in Florida, period. As the Latino population in a state like Florida becomes more diverse, no one nationality of Latino really has a lock anymore, no?
No. I mean, Puerto Ricans, first of all, Cubans are the fourth largest Latino group in the United States. And they're centralized. They're very centralized. And in Florida, things are changing. The demographics are changing. Puerto Ricans are coming in. You have Venezuelans. Puerto Ricans especially vote Democrat. So it is changing things.
It's changing.
And they are not – they're still a powerful voting bloc. I mean, let's
be real.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I guess for me the big takeaway is – this power transition in Cuba is a good time to remind ourselves that even though we might not think it is all the time, Cuba is important and worth talking about and worth discussing. And it also, I think, can give us a view into the way that Team Trump works. And he kind of, in many ways, when it comes to global affairs, reverts to this older kind of Cold War mindset. Good guys, bad guys, and America is a strong man. All right, time for a quick break. When we come back, we'll play my favorite game, Who Said That? And we'll also hear from you, our listeners, sharing with us the best things that happened to you all week. BRB.
Support for this podcast and the following message is brought to you by the new Netflix original documentary series, Wild Wild Country. When a controversial guru builds a utopian city near a small town in the Oregon desert, a conflict with local ranchers ensues. As tensions rise, neither group will back down, leading to a series of events, including the first bioterror attack in U.S. history. Wild Wild Country, now streaming only on Netflix.
What does it take to start something from nothing? And what does it take to actually build it? I'm Guy Raz. Every week on How I Built This, I speak with founders behind some of the most inspiring companies in the world. Find it on NPR One or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, the show where we catch up on the week that was. I'm Sam Sanders here with two guests, Justin Richmond of NPR's Morning Edition and Shireen Marisol Meraji of NPR's Code Switch team. You guys, since this is our kind of Kanye-themed episode, I want to give you one more inspo Kanye tweet. This one's my favorite. Quote, "As a creative, your ideas are your strongest form of currency."
Oh.
Boom.
That's true.
I like it.
Fall so
Yes.
hard.
Can I drop my favorite Kanye tweet from this week?
Please.
Do it.
This is my favorite. Truth is my goal. Controversy is my gym. I'll do 100 reps of controversy for a six-pack of truth.
See, I didn't get that one.
Yo, that's like, that is so yay, and I appreciate that.
It made no
That's
sense
the
to
old
me.
yay.
I love it. You guys, now it's time for my favorite game. It's called Who Said That? I share a quote from the week. You guys have to guess who said that.
Okay.
Or at least get close, name the story, topic. Just get in the general area.
I'm ready for this.
If you win, you get
I'm
nothing.
not, because we've been working on our podcast all week.
know.
I've been working
what's
too,
going
but
on
I'm
in the
ready for
world.
this. I stay ready for pop culture.
You know what, though?
Let's
It
see.
doesn't matter because the winner gets absolutely nothing.
Okay.
I know. It's all good. First quote. Ready? First of all, that album belongs to the people.
Kanye.
No.
Kendrick Lamar.
Another rapper. It's a
Kendrick.
rapper. No.
Oh.
A rapper. About
That
an
album
that's ever
belongs to the people.
An album that has been hidden for like a year or two now.
Wu-Tang.
Yes.
Wu-Tang.
Yes. So that was Method Man. He was on the Colbert Show this week, and he was talking about this mysterious Wu-Tang album called Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. They made this album, and I think they sold it to the highest bidder, which happens to be Martin Shkreli, a.k.a. Pharma Bro. This was the guy who got in trouble for defrauding investors.
So they made this album a long time ago, or they made this album recently?
They made this album a few years ago.
Oh, just a few years
but
ago.
they sold the one copy of it. He bought it, but then he went to prison because he was doing weird things with drug prices.
Defrauding investors.
But now that Shkreli is in federal prison, officially this Wu-Tang album belongs to Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Oh, no.
Oh, I hope
It's
he's
never
bumping that
coming
hard.
METHO.
He might change the marijuana policy now, too. He's like, yo, let's make that legal everywhere.
So Jeff Sessions has this mysterious Wu-Tang album now, and now members of Wu-Tang are saying, release it. Justin, you're up 1-0. Shireen, you can bring the funk.
Okay.
I believe you.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not really good at this kind of competitive stuff.
I
Justin
think
is
you're
like shaking in his seat. Like, he's so competitive.
I love it.
Okay.
All right, next quote.
Yeah.
I had just persuaded a dog to let me put her into polka dot pajamas. Not my dog. When I heard the news, I didn't believe it.
A dog put me in polka dots.
It's about a certain award that was announced this week.
The Pulitzer?
Yes.
The Pulitzer?
The Pulitzers. So this was Andrew Sean Greer. He won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction this week for a comedic novel called Less. It is very rare for a comedic novel to win this prize. It's also rare for Kendrick to win for music for his rap album, Damn.
Very
so
rare.
Radical.
Pulitzer's going out there this year. I kind of appreciate it. Also, I want to see a photo of the dog in polka dot pajamas. Yeah. Anyways, it's tied 1-1.
Shireen didn't even get the name.
I said Pulitzer.
I'm lenient
That was
here.
really,
At least you said
really...
it Pulitzer. I like it that
Yeah,
way.
let's
At least that.
Pulitzer.
Ready for the last one?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Quote, I will say this over and over. This material does not need to be in a populated area, period. Who said that?
This material does not need to be in a populated area.
What's a certain kind of bodily material that you never want to be around?
Velcro.
What?
Oh.
Caca?
Yes. So listeners to this show will know that we have been following closely the story of the poop train.
Oh, yeah.
That story has come to an end
avoided
this
that
week.
one.
So there's a town in Alabama named Parrish where a train brimming with sewage sludge has been just sitting in the town. NPR's Colin Dwyer wrote, for upwards of 2 months, a train brimming with sewage sludge has been squatting uninvited near fields used for youth baseball.
He had to do that.
Simmering in the afternoon sun,
writer.
making its noisome presence known even in the darkness of night. In a word, Mayor Heather Hall told the AP earlier this week, it smells like death.
Oh.
So after weeks of dealing with this smell,
terrible.
the poop train has moved on and gone to its final destination where it will be buried in a landfill. So that first town, Parrish, is going to get some relief. Congrats, Parrish. All right, who won?
I won.
Shireen won.
Caca.
Congrats.
Stop
Pulitzer.
saying it.
Or should I say Pulitzer?
Pulitzer.
Pulitzer.
I love it. I love it. That concludes Who Said That. Congratulations, Shireen. You
Thank
get
you.
nothing
Shireen
but pride.
Marisol Meraji.
Marisol Meraji.
Yes.
You
Never
guys.
gonna hear the end of this.
So much pride.
All right, y'all, now it's time to end the show as we do every week. We ask our listeners to share with us the best things that happened to them all week. We encourage folks to brag. Anjali, hit the tape.
Hey, Sam. This is Joy from Charlotte, North Carolina. And the best thing that happened to me this week is that I started a new job on Monday, but I'm calling you from vacation in Hawaii. My new boss didn't even want me to bring my laptop.
Good boss.
Hello, this is Chris from Corville, and the best thing that happened to me this week was getting to watch my wife Jess run and finish the Boston Marathon on Monday.
Whoa.
Wow.
I found out that I got into my #1 grad program after being waitlisted for over a month.
Congrats.
A band that I joined 2 years ago is releasing an album.
Send it to us.
This week, my daughter and I took a 7-hour road trip from Vail to Salt Lake City to go see our first Justin Timberlake concert.
Oh, yeah.
My son Sean had his Eagle Scout Court of Honor, and my parents were able to witness opposite in town from Chicago.
The favorite part of my week was getting to the episode of The Real Housewives of Atlanta where they all say, "Who said that?"
Hey, Sam. This is Carol from Brooklyn, New York.
Hey, Carol.
The best thing that happened to me this week was at 12:01 a.m. on April 14th, my birthday.
Happy birthday.
My boyfriend stood up in the bar and had everyone at the bar, many of whom I didn't know, give me 3 cheers. Hip, hip, hooray for my birthday.
That's awesome.
Hi, Sam. This is Lex in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Hey.
And the best thing that happened to me all week was watching my 19-month-old son dance and play around at a festival that was taking place this past weekend in Emancipation Park.
Wow.
Which was the site of the Unite the Right rally last year. And just watching him have the best time and playing around and having a blast dancing to the music, surrounded by people of all different races and cultures and identities. It was really amazing.
That's
and
awesome.
It's the sort of memory that I'm going to take with me when we unfortunately move away from Charlottesville in the next month. That's the Charlottesville I know and love, and it was really beautiful to be reminded of that. Thanks.
Thanks.
Have a great week.
Bye.
All right, thanks to all the voices you heard there. Joy, Chris, Rory, Jamie, Mary, Sarah, Holly, Carol, and Lex. Listeners, we listen to all of these you send in every week, and we definitely enjoy all the animal photos we get too. The dog pics, the cat pics. I'm still waiting for a ferret picture.
Oh, are you?
I would love one. Yeah. Anyways, thanks for sharing. Send us more whenever you want. samsanders@npr.org. samsanders@npr.org. Before we have Inspo Kanye take us out, I want us to pay tribute to a man whose voice you've known for decades. Talking about Carl Kasell, longtime NPR newscaster, also judge and scorekeeper for NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Carl died Tuesday from complications from Alzheimer's disease in Potomac, Maryland. He was 84. Carl was a good man. I knew him a little bit.
Oh, yeah, I loved him.
Loved him, yeah. Peter Sagal, host of Wait, Wait, he said of Carl Kasell, quote, "He was kind down to his bones."
Mm-hmm.
I believe that.
Truth.
Carl will miss you.
I heard that in his voice.
Yeah, yeah. With that, it's time for some more Inspo Kanye. He's going to take us out.
Oh, yeah. Inspo Kanye.
Thank you guys so much. It was fun.
Thanks Sam.
This week, the show was produced by Brent Bachman and Anjali Sastry. Our director of programming is Steve Nelson. And editing this week came from Jeff Rogers and Allison McAdam. Our big boss who keeps us in business is Anya Grundman, VP of Programming here at NPR. Oh, yeah, we love Anya. Listeners, refresh your feed Tuesday morning. I got a chat with novelist Meg Wolitzer. She has a new book out. It's called The Female Persuasion. I liked it a lot. It's on everyone's must-read list this year. And already, the book's just out. Already, Nicole Kidman has signed on to star in the movie of this book.
Oh, man, wow.
There we go.
Yeah, and I'm ready for it.
Can't lose with Nicole Kidman.
Cannot lose with her. All right. Also, one last announcement. You don't like Nicole Kidman?
I was going to say something.
Big up Nicole Kidman.
Say it.
No, I was just going to. No, I'm not going to say anything. Keep quiet there.
Also, listeners, we announced this in our Tuesday episode, but if you haven't heard yet, I'm taking my happy self to the home place of Kanye West. Going to be in Chicago for a live show next month.
Chi-town, man.
Yeah.
Together, I love it. Home of Kanye, home of good things, good food, and good people. I'll be there May 15th for a live show with some special guests. Come join me. Go to wbez.org/events to buy your ticket. It's going to be fun.
Eat some Puerto Rican food while you're there.
Oh, okay.
Huge Puerto Rican community.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Will y'all come with?
Yes. Frito. I would love to.
Done. On it. All right. Until we see you in Chicago or talk to you in your earbuds again, thank you for listening. I'm Sam Sanders. Talk soon.
Pull up in a monster automobile gangster with a bad that came from Sri Lanka. Yeah, I'm in a tanka, color of Willy Wonka. You could be the king, but watch the queen come.